So after a couple of promises of getting this video out, I finally got around to doing it, and that's to talking about some of my breakthrough players of 2018 that I think will come more into the consciousness of the golf fan out there through this year. So these are guys, I'm going to try and pick some guys perhaps more towards the top end of the rankings, who I think we'll start to see win some of the larger events, and that's the WGCs, potentially majors, outside chances of majors. But certainly I expect us to see them contending more at the big events and becoming more of a feature. And then I'll pick a couple of guys kind of in the middle of the pack who I expect to make not necessarily Tommy Fleetwood-esque rises over the last 12 months, but certainly people that I think will start to come out and be more productive and probably win for the first time on tour. And just again become more relevant to us, the golfing public. And then a couple of rookies on both the European and PGA Tours who are worth looking out for and rooting for, and people that say, certainly from looking at social media and those in the know, expect them to have really interesting, exciting golfing careers, and they're obviously at the start, and so just kind of want to put them in your consciousness to keep out for the season. So I'll split it into the European and PGA Tours, or those that are more European and PGA Tour focused. I'll start the European Tour. So first guy to look out for is somebody who performed very well last weekend in Abu Dhabi. That's Matt Fitzpatrick. I mean, he's been around now for probably 3 or 4 years. Number one amateur in the world. Won a couple of the big amateur events, the US Am. Performed very well in the Masters at a young age. And he's already I think he's 30 in the world at this stage in the World Golf Rankings. Already a class act, not the longest hitter by any stretch of the imagination, and he's trying to build up length in his game, but what a great iron play and short game. I don't know if you saw any of the golf at the weekend, but his putting was unbelievable from any distance. So he's somebody that's kind of been there or thereabouts. He's already won a few times on the European Tour. He won, and towards the back end of last season, finished the season off very well, and obviously by all accounts has started 2018 in good form. I just expect him to do well this year. I think actually some of the courses are going to be really set up well for him. He did well in the Masters last year, came 7th. I think he'll also do well at Shinnecock. Shinnecock is probably going to be a typical aggressive US course, which is going to put a premium on precision. And his iron play is great, and he's got great short game, so I expect him to contend there. USPGA I don't, because I think it'll be a bomber's course. And Carnoustie, depends how the wind plays. He's used to playing in windy conditions, being from Sheffield, so he's certainly somebody to watch out for. I wouldn't necessarily say he'll win. I think if one of the big boys puts it all together, I think they'll win any of the majors, and there's half a dozen people you can put in that category. But certainly I expect him to be there or thereabouts. I expect a couple of top fives, certainly a top 5 in one of the majors, but also to really turn up in the WGCs. A couple of the names to be aware of in the European Tour, I think are going to make some really big strides this year. One guy, South African Dylan Fratelli, he's already won a couple of times on the European Tour, but on some of the smaller events. So he won the Austrian Open last year. He also won in Mauritius, which is an Asian and European dual sanctioned event. So he's won a couple of the smaller events. He's a massive hitter, very good long hitter. Again, he did quite well last weekend in Abu Dhabi, but he's been there or thereabouts, so I expect him to do better and better. He reminds me a little bit of Brandon Grace, when Brandon Grace sort of burst on the scene about half a dozen years ago. I expect him to potentially have that sort of career. So Brandon Grace has always been there or thereabouts in the top 30 of the world, and consistently performing in the big tournaments. So there's something about him. He's got a bit of something about him that I really think we'll see more and more of. So I expect him to do well. I expect him to continue winning on the European Tour, and hopefully getting his world ranking up high enough that he'll get into some of the WGC events. It'll be just to see how he fares in them. And then another guy who is very reminiscent of Thomas Pieters, his countryman, that's Thomas Detree. Again, another guy did quite well in Abu Dhabi. I promise you I had these names before the championships last weekend, but it's just how it's worked out for me. But he's currently like 200 and 200 plus in the world at the minute, world ranking wise, or certainly was going into last week. Great long game. Went to the same university as Thomas Pieters, very much like his countrymen, although I think a little bit more placid, a little less emotional, but great game, very solid. I expect him to rise quite dramatically in the rankings over the next couple of years. So last year was his rookie season on European Tour, had a second, had a third. Did very well on the Challenge Tour the year before. I expect him to contend. I expect him to win an event at some stage during this season on the European Tour, perhaps one of the smaller ones. But even so, I expect him to contend and to really make a serious rise up the rankings. I expect him to be in the top 100 by the end of the year. I think he's got that much talent. I know he's really well respected by his peers. And then my rookie to watch out for on the European Tour. This is a little left field. Not quite sure how many events he'll actually get himself into just by virtue of where his ranking is at the minute. But that's Sam Horsfield. So Sam Horsfield is a 21-year-old who, I suppose his claim to fame at this stage is two things. One, Ian Poulter saw him as a 14-year-old and went, this kid's going to make it. I know a lot of people have an opinion on Ian Poulter, bless him, but he knows a good player when he sees one, I'm sure. So the fact that he's made it, and then the other thing is, at Q School at the end of last season, he absolutely obliterated the field. I think he obliterated by 6 or 7 shots in the end. So the kid's got talent for sure. The challenge is he's so lowly ranked at the minute. I think he's like 1,925. He's not going to get into the premier Tier 1 European Tour events. He will get into perhaps some of the smaller ones, so he'll have to make hay in those smaller events and do well, so there'll be more pressure on him there. But he's obviously got a lot of talent, so it'll be really interesting to see how he does develop and nurture over the season. So those are my ones to watch on a European Tour. If we flip over to the PGA Tour, the one guy who I think people will know more about from his performances last year, but I think he will really hit the ground this year, and I expect him to make the Ryder Cup for the US team, and that's Patrick Cantlay. So Patrick, former world number 1 amateur, and he was world number 1 amateur when Jordan Spieth was an amateur, which shows you how good he was, and he was world number 1 amateur for 55 weeks, so over a year, which is very, very impressive. He has struggled with back injuries and also personal tragedy. His best mate, who was his caddy, was killed in a hit and run in front of Patrick's own eyes a couple of years ago. So he's somebody who's already been through quite a lot in his short career. He's only 25. And because of his injuries as well, he has to manage a back injury. So he's only able to play a certain amount of events. So the first we'll see him in this year is this week at Torrey Pines in the Farmers Insurance. But last year, he only played about half of the events on the PGA Tour, but was finishing in the top 10 all the time. He won his first maiden event, which I think was the Shriners at the back end of last year. So he's got one PGA Tour event under his belt, albeit a smaller one, and perhaps where not necessarily a lot of the big guns are playing him. But he will contend this year, and I expect him to contend immediately in some of the big events too. So WGCs, yes, definitely, and majors, I expect him to be there or thereabouts because his whole game is solid. Tee to green, I've got wrote down some stats here. Tee to green, he was 1 stroke better than the whole field over the last year's stats, and his putting stats, he was half a stroke better than the whole field. I mean, that's huge discrepancies, bearing in mind the limited amount of events that he played last year. So I really expect him to make that leap forward, and I do expect to see him in the Ryder Cup this year, even though he'll play less events than most of the other guys he's going to be competing for spots with. I think he's that talented. Next couple of guys to look out for. Austin Cook. So Austin has, similarly to Patrick, he's already won once on the PGA Tour, and he was leading after 54 holes of last week's Career Builder Challenge. Again, he was in my list last week. I should have done this video last week. So again, he had another really good event, didn't quite make it. A couple of things about him. He's really made very good, steady progress on the PGA Tour. People really like his game. He's a bit like Patrick. He's got a good all-round game. Clearly hits the ball wrong. A couple of things I do like about him. I love his caddy, Kip Henley. You should follow him on Twitter. If you don't, he's a good follow on social media. Seems like a top guy. But again, he's one of those, I don't expect him to necessarily get into the Ryder Cup or maybe contend in the majors. He might, but I do expect him to turn up a little bit more in some of the larger events. I think by virtue of obviously winning last year, he's going to be in the Masters, he's going to be in a couple of the big tournaments, the Players, etc., WGCs. So we should see more of him, which will see him come up the rankings. So he's certainly somebody to look out for. The other one of similar type of skill set vein, I would say to Patrick Cantlay in a way, again, great college career, great amateur career. We saw him contend a little bit last year, but never won, and that's a guy called Ollie Schneiderjans. Name him. Again, he contended a lot last year. He went through a bit of a phase of missing a few cuts at one stage, but overall had a pretty solid first full year on the tour, and was very close to running Xander Schauffele as Rookie of the Year until Xander went mad and won the Tour Championships at the end. Great long iron player, bit of a, I suppose, social media sensation with his 2-iron stinger. We're obviously missing Tiger's stinger shots, but he was certainly played some unbelievable 2 irons and long iron stinger shots. But he's more than that. Again, he's sort of, the other thing that's interesting about him is I think he's pretty much the only tour player who doesn't wear a hat or a visor. So he's a guy with a massive side parting. Seems like a good dude by all accounts. Hear lots of good things. He just looks to me, from the eye test, far too talented not to win on that PGA Tour. So I expect him to win at some stage during this year. Again, similarly to Thomas Detry, probably one of the smaller PGA Tour events, but I certainly expect him to feature quite heavily this year and to make his breakthrough and win. And then my rookie to look out for, and again, I'm going to put the caveat here, I'll sound like I'm repeating myself a lot. He did quite well last weekend. I certainly started off very well last weekend. That's Beau Hossler. Again, another college star, not the biggest college star that was coming out this year, but he's made a bunch of cuts already in the full series. Obviously had a good week last week at the Career Builder Challenge. And again, he's one of these guys who's made that step from college to pro almost seamlessly. He's got a couple of those top 10s under his belt already, so he's got some money in the bank, which means he can be a little bit more flexible with his schedule, starting off on the front foot. So I expect him to take that confidence forward. He might win this year. Again, similar to Schneiderjans, it's probably going to be a smaller event if it's going to be any of them. But he looks like he's got all the stuff to be aware of. So there you go. I've given you four tips and 4 names of people to watch out for this year. A couple of established stars in Fitzpatrick and Cantlay, and then 4 sort of up and coming guys in Detry, Fratelli on the European Tour, Schneiderjans and I've forgotten, Austin Cook on the PGA Tour, and then your 2 rookies, Sam Horsfield and Beau Hossler. Let me know your thoughts, feedback. Welcome any names that you guys are thinking about this year that I should be aware of moving forward. Any comments, put them down below. Look forward to hearing from you. Cheers.